So we can all agree that the 70s were by far one of the craziest times in United States history. We had the Watergate scandal was at its climax, the Cold War was ongoing, and we were furthering what was possible with science and technology through the space race. But one small development kind of slipped through the cracks between all these scandals and fashion trends. A game was developed called Dungeons & Dragons. It was published in 1974 by Gary Gygax, and it was a small collection of books that left most people kind of confused of what is this new game? Because at the time, the gaming scenery was mostly like the arcades were brand new, home consoles were brand new. It was still an uncharted territory. The most popular game at the time was Pong, and that was just the recreation of tennis with like as minimal graphics as possible. So when Gary Gygax made these books, no one really knew how to react. But like, what really even is the game about when you open up the book? Well, from a surface standpoint, you kind of see, whoa, there's a lot of tables, numbers, stats, like what is this crap? And when you look at it, it seems to be a game about randomly determined outcomes. But that's just from a surface level. If you look at other things like movies at surface levels, you just see flashes of colors and sounds in a weird dark room. So I think you need to dig in a little bit deeper to really understand what this game is. And so going back into like the history of it a little bit, when the game first came out, it was immediately very popular. And I think that was because it developed a really strong community really quickly, because it kind of provided this escape. Because D&D was definitely like this role-playing game of where you kind of don't have to worry about politics, the world, all these devastating things. You could just sit at home, enjoy yourself, be somebody else. And this was apparent because within the first 11 months of the game, 1,000 copies were already sold. Those were all the handmade copies that Gary Gygax had, and he was underprepared. And so as you go down the line, like everyone was insatiable for this game. And as you go down, everyone started loving it, and it was amazing. But there was this really awkward time afterwards in the beginning of the 80s. There was this thing called the Satanic Panic. And although it sounds really absurd, it was actually a thing. A lot of people were very concerned with like cult activities across the US, where it was like practicing witchcraft and demon worshiping. And when you look at D&D and you see, oh, there's spells, there's sorcery, there's demons and monsters, it kind of got caught in the crossfire. Everyone was looking at it and just like, wait a second, this looks kind of familiar. And really what happened was there's like this surge of uproar because especially in 1979, according to the New York Times, there was a disappearance of a student named James Egbert. And he was a really bright student, but he also played D&D and was a huge fan, and so people drew that connection and attributed his disappearance and all of his issues with the game. But when you go beyond that and you look at the aftermath of all that, you see a lot of these people and all these celebrities looking back with these fond memories. In an interview with Stephen Colbert, he said it was an acting exercise for him as a kid. It kind of trained him to be a comedian, to be a writer. It is this like sort of window of opportunity for a lot of these people to kind of like develop their own personality of what they want to do with their lives. And one thing that was really important when you open up the book, it says like within the first few pages is that one of the things you need is a very vivid imagination. Because looking at the cover, you see all these amazing creatures, and like flipping through, you see these amazing artworks. And the part of the imagination that was really important was the fact that when you went home, you played with your friends, your game was completely unique. You went to somebody else, their style was completely different. It's like exactly the same thing as if going to two separate movies. Although there's plenty of movies around the same theme, there's so many different types of movies within each subcategory. And going into the mechanics of, okay, so it's like character acting. It's like kind of like you're being an actor. What else is there really to do? Well, the other important role in the game is the Dungeon Master. And that kind of sounds like a confusing term and has like a lot of other kind of subjects kind of attributed to it. But in the context of the game, it was mostly the combination of a storyteller and a referee for the game. So you describe the environment, you describe the character interactions, you do the sceneries, everything, but you also determine what is allowed and what isn't. So you kind of keep everything in straight lines. You kind of let it stay to a good story. And so you could kind of equate that the DM is like the author, and then that the adventurers and the other players are the actual characters. And so you get this really complex role of people character acting, doing improv, doing all of this, imaginative creativity that was hard to replicate between two games. So it was kind of bizarre that the game did so well. And even after the Satanic Panic, the game continued to do well. The Satanic Panic brought more attention to the game. People were interested now. They were like, this is a big deal. And then sadly, the game began to stagnate in the late 2000s and early 2010s when people were just like, it's kind of old, it's paper and pencil, we've seen it. And so a company that recently bought Dungeons & Dragons called Wizards of the Coast, they decided to redo it and make a 5th edition where they kind of like tried to reignite all this old love and nostalgia for the game. And with the help of some pop culture references and some new D&D shows even like in the market, people have been returning to the game and new members have been joining the game at pretty good rates. Like the game seems to have been making a return and is doing really well. And that's about the story of Dungeons & Dragons so far.